Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about tag team wrestling on the NES. But before we get into the NES one, tag team wrestling was released in the arcades in 1983 in Japan and 1984 in North America. It was known as the Big Pro Wrestling in Japan, and it was developed by Technos and published by Data East. The game was ported to the NES and to the Famicom in 1986. It was actually one of the first third-party games released in North America, and it was the first Data East game that was released on the NES. It's kind of a quirky wrestling game, to be honest. Instead of just having button combinations to do different moves, you have a menu that drops down, and you need to press a button a certain number of times, or you need to select the move that you want to do. It can be rather confusing, but it does kind of work in the arcades. The biggest thing that's a problem, and the biggest difference between the NES and the arcade version, are the wrestlers that you're going up against. There are only two teams in tag team wrestling. In the arcades, you play as Team Ricky, where you have clones of Ricky. They look the exact same. There's not much of a difference. The other team, the Strong Bads, are not much better, but they did in fact give us Strong Bad on Homestar Runner and his brother Strong Bad. So, yeah, there's that, which is great. We'll talk more once we get into the NES version in just a second. There is no story in this game, so we're just going to skip right to the gameplay. And I wouldn't say that I like the controls of the NES version at all. It just isn't very good, and things feel very repetitive as you're just playing against the same team over and over again. Like many arcade games, this is just you going for a high score, and as you keep winning, you eventually get larger trophies, which really doesn't amount to much. I mentioned when I talked about the arcade version that the characters do look a little bit different. Instead of having two Rickies on Team 1, you have Ricky and Ultra Machine. So Ultra Machine looks different. He's just a masked wrestler, and I'm guessing was supposed to be a play on the Machine stable in All Japan Wrestling or New Japan Wrestling. I can't remember exactly where the Machine stable was. Both of the members of Team Strong Bads now kind of look the same. They're both masked wrestlers, so Strong Bad is gone. And yeah, those are the four characters in this. Ricky and Ultra Machine are locked on player 1, and Whirly and Mazcross are locked on player 2. So you can't even select the characters that you want to play unless you plug in a different controller. It's pretty awful, to be honest. At least you have a variety of moves that you can still do, but my God, is it hard to pull off any of them. All of the moves need to be done from basically a lockup or a grapple position. And good luck doing that at all. If you're good enough, or if you've practiced and played this game enough, you figure out you need to hit your opponent, then you can lock up, and then you just need to mash the B button for the correct move that you want to do. So let's go through this god-awful move list. You have 7 different moves you have 8 different moves that you can pull off, because heaven forbid that I forget one in here. The first move needs no button presses, so you just lock up and you'll automatically do a body attack, or drop kick, or body slam. You press the B button once, it's drop kick, body slam, body attack, or drop kick, depending on the character that you want to play as. This continues all the way up to 7 button presses, so yeah, it's incredibly annoying to do this. When I was suffering through this game, I had no idea what the hell was happening. And oftentimes, it didn't matter how many times I pressed the B button because it would just sort of do whatever it felt like. Most of the time, that was just a drop kick or some kind of a kick attack, which didn't really look like anything. Now, if you were thinking this is going to work the same way once you get thrown out of the ring, you'd be wrong. So with that one, you only have 3 moves that you can do. If you press the B button from 0 to 3 times, you do a body slam. If you press it somewhere between 4 and 6 times, it's a backdrop. And 7 times, you just throw them into the ring post. One cool thing to mention about throwing your opponent to the outside, you can pick up the ring bell and bash them once, then the ring bell just disappears. In the arcade version, you sometimes have somebody that will run out from the crowd and beat up your player, but I've never witnessed this happen, so I can't really confirm if that happens in the NES game. I never saw that take place. It apparently happens in the arcade version, but I never saw that happen either. Changing up the moves from being inside the ring and going to the outside of the ring makes some sense because a lot of the moves on the list require the ring ropes to do something, and those aren't going to be available once you go outside. It was pretty easy to get in and out of the ring, which thankfully didn't cause a huge problem, because there are count-out victories in this, which I never got close to. Overall, I don't like the gameplay in this at all. You can get used to it after time, and in the early days of the NES, it would have been fine to go through this sort of thing. However, when you compare it to the other wrestling games on the NES, this really isn't good at all. It's right up there with M.U.S.C.L.E, even though I think this game is a little bit better than M.U.S.C.L.E. So I had to go and look up the manual for this game because I got sick and tired of not having any idea what I was doing. I figured I could just sort of work my way through this, as I've done with a lot of the other wrestling games on here, before I went to the manual to figure out what the hell I was supposed to be doing. I also wanted to see if there was any story to this, which, no, there really isn't. There's no story for the characters, no story for why you're only wrestling 2 people over and over again. But what I was really looking for was how these stupid controls work. And even when I read through the table that they have here, it just made me upset because it didn't make any sense why they thought having somebody press a B button 5 or 6 times was going to, be fun at all. At least with the arcade game, you have the menu, so you can kind of work your way through it. But yeah, it's just not a fun game at all. There are also these special features in here as well for, I don't know, I guess if you subject yourself to playing this game for a while, then you can do different things. I wasn't all that interested in figuring it out, and I just wanted to get as far into this game as I could. Anyway, the controls in this are absolutely infuriating. I hate them so much, and it just made me want to go play a different game. They function, but my god, it's not worth it when you finally pull off some of the moves in this. For an NES game that was released in 1986, it looks okay. It's not amazing or anything like that. It doesn't look as good as WCW Wrestling or Tecmo World Wrestling, and I don't think it looks as good as Pro Wrestling on the NES. It's just an average-looking game, but hey, at least it looks somewhat close to the arcade. So there is that. It's a fine-looking game, but it's not really anything special. The moves look pretty good. The animation is nice. It's a little comical and a little goofy, but that's okay. I do want to point out some flashing lights with the victory and the losing animations. I don't have a problem with seizures, but I could see somebody having an issue with that, just because there are quite a bit of flashing lights at the end. Anyway, let's move into my final thoughts, and I can stop talking about tag team wrestling on the NES. If you can get into this game and learn how to play it, then the game's fine. It is lacking a lot of the features from the other NES games. The gameplay can be very frustrating. The visuals are okay. Tag team wrestling can be fun, but I would recommend playing it on like an arcade emulator like MAME instead of playing the NES port. It's an interesting game. It was really just a product of the mid-'80s and would have been fun in the arcades. The NES port is just not all that great, and more liberties should have been taken with the source material when they were bringing it to the home console. The developers did change up the characters a little bit, but the menu system should have been changed. It just didn't work that well on an NES controller. This game is not as bad as M.U.S.C.L.E. I think just having all the moves in here makes it a better game than M.U.S.C.L.E. But the controls are just not very good at all. Tag team wrestling is kind of a lousy game on the NES, but it's one of those bad games that it still gives you a reason to go play it, just because it is a playable game and it is more fun than at least M.U.S.C.L.E. and maybe more fun than WrestleMania. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you played this growing up, definitely let me know, because I'd love to hear what your experiences were. I will talk to you all later. Bye.